Good afternoon. My name is Steve Gregorian. I'm the president and CEO of the Detroit Economic Club. Welcome to today's meeting, and I especially want to welcome our DEC members. If you're not a DEC member yet, please allow me 10 seconds to myth bust. One, there's no nomination process, no application process, and no job level requirement for becoming a DEC member. We're just simply looking for people that want to build their networks and to learn from thought leaders on stage like the ones you will hear today. You can sign up today at econclub.org. And as we get started, just kindly check your cell phone so it's on silent so we do not disturb today's program. And if you've been with us before, one of the many traditions of the DEC is we always begin by honoring our country with the Pledge of Allegiance. So I'd ask you to stand and join me. The flag is to my right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And kindly remain standing as our invocation today will be delivered by Deacon Joseph Adams from the Hartford Memorial Church.
Shall we pray? Almighty God, bless this meeting and the information shared. We know that these are troubling times, that all men need to come together. We pray for peace and understanding. Help us to recognize that we are all of one family of many colors, a family of different religions, and of different ethnic backgrounds, but created in the same likeness as our Creator. We must unify as a nation. We must end our prejudice and hypocrisy. The Chief Justice and the Lieutenant Governor believe in safe and strong communities, restoring the dignity of each person and making sure our justice system works for every family. They are partnering to reborn and to conform the Michigan criminal justice system and increase access to the justice system because they are passionate about equal justice for all, and they understand that a stable and strong family and communities are critical to our business seeking to grow and create good-paying jobs. Forces outside and also some on the inside of our nation are moving to destroy our democratic way of life. We must protect our rule of law, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We ask these blessings from you who have created us all. Amen.
Thank you, Deacon Adams. A quick but important thank you to Detroit Public TV and Lawrence Technological University for partnering today on our live webcast. And if you've been with us before, you know we love having high school and college students with us. Each meeting, our students get an opportunity to have a private session with our guest speakers. Today was no exception. We had a terrific session. Let's just take a quick minute to let you know the students that were here and their generous corporate sponsors. Today we've got students from Riverview High School, courtesy of Rod Gillum and Jackson Lewis. River Rouge High School, courtesy of Nolan Finley and the Detroit News. Loyola High School, thanks to the Detroit Auto Dealers Association. Divine Child High School, thanks to Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan. Birmingham Groves High School, two groups, one from sponsored by Oakland Community College, thank you Doug Smith, and the second group, John Geit from Citizens Commercial Banking. So ladies and gentlemen, how about a round of applause to welcome those students and thank their generous sponsors. A couple things on your table. Take a look at the sponsor brochure. Please patronize those businesses. They are the reason we can continue to bring you programs like the one you will see today. We're forever thankful for those sponsors. Also on your table is our season lineup. You'll see February 7th, we are lucky enough to host Governor Gretchen Whitmer, and we're honored that she chose the DEC for her first public remarks after she unveils the budget in Lansing just one day earlier. So watch the season lineups and the website and your email for more meetings to be added soon. The DEC has an incredible history of speakers we love to share. Lieutenant Governor and Chief Justice, January 28th is a very popular date in our 86-year history. You both now join a distinguished list of 21 other speakers who graced our podium. And this list, as I was looking at it, was quite remarkable. If you think about the year they spoke and their topics, it's an incredible window on U.S. and world history. Here's a few highlights. 1938, think of the year. Ernst Mayr spoke at the DEC. He was a founding member of the Communist Party of Germany. Think of the year. 1946, General John Wainwright, commander of the Allied forces in the Philippines during World War II, spoke at the DEC. In 1960, Jan Haak, a member of the South African Parliament, 1960, listen to the title of the program, Can South Africa Survive the Rising Tide of Race, Nationalism, and Communism? And then to have some fun, in 1983, George Will from ABC News spoke, and his provocative program was titled The Trouble with Economics. So today we are pleased to add you, Lieutenant Governor and Chief Justice, as our 22nd and 23rd speakers on this day in DEC history. Congratulations and thank you for being with us. Okay, real quick, 3 technology-related items because we love technology at the DEC. We're piloting a way for DEC members to network using technology. I hope you've taken a minute to download the Plain Sight app and check into the meeting. With this app, you'll see skills and interests of everybody else in the room in real time, and you just never know. Your next great hire or contract resource might be just a few feet away. So check it out. It's in pilot phase. Let us know what you think. Technology number 2, if you're a tweeter, we want you to tweet today using @economicclub. And technology number 3, one of the more popular elements is certainly our Q&A session. We want to hear from you in the final 15 minutes, and you can use your smartphone to submit questions to our presiding officer, who I'm about to put to work. Rod Gillum is a principal at the law firm of Jackson Lewis. He is a board member, corporate secretary, and great friend to the DEC, and a huge supporter of many, many things in our community. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Rod Gillum.
Thank you, Steve, and good afternoon, DEC members and guests. It's my privilege to introduce today's participants. Lieutenant Governor Garlin Gilchrist has dedicated his career to fixing problems for hardworking families. He previously served as the first ever Director of Information and Emerging Technology for the City of Detroit, where he used public data and technology to address everyday concerns that the community was facing. Before returning to Detroit, Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist worked as a software engineer at Microsoft. That's the technology you were talking about there, Steve. During his time in Seattle, he served as social media manager for the 2008 Obama campaign in Washington. A native Detroiter, Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist studied computer engineering and computer science at the University of Michigan, graduating with honors. He is a co-chair of the Michigan Joint Task Force on Jail and Pretrial Incarceration. Chief Justice Bridget Mary McCormack joined the Michigan Supreme Court in 2013 and became Chief Justice in 2019. An NYU law graduate, Chief Justice McCormack started her legal career in New York City. In 1996, she joined the Yale Law School faculty. She then joined the University of Michigan Law School faculty in 1998, where she taught criminal law, legal ethics, and various clinics. In 2019, Governor Whitmer appointed her as co-chair of the Michigan Joint Task Force on Jail and Pretrial Incarceration. Chief Justice McCormack continues to teach at the University of Michigan each year. Now, our moderator today is a familiar face to all. Nolan Finley is the editorial page editor of the Detroit News, a position he's held since May 1, 2000. Nolan is a weekly contributor to the My Week show on Detroit Public Television and often appears on Flashpoint on WDIV-TV, Local 4. Nolan is a graduate of both Schoolcraft College in Livonia and Wayne State University, where he earned a bachelor's degree in journalism and is also a native of Cumberland County, Kentucky. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm Detroit Economic Club welcome to Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist and Chief Justice McCormack. It's on you, Mr. Finley. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Rod. Thank you all for joining us. And thanks to the Chief Justice and Lieutenant Governor, not just for being here today, but for your work on this project over the past year. This whole idea of criminal justice reform is becoming an issue, one of the few issues that is uniting us, conservatives, liberal, Republicans, and Democrats. There seems to be a real commitment across the ideological lines and political lines to get justice right. And that's what your project was all about. Governor Gretchen Whitmer appointed you two to head a task force of 21 members to find out who's in Michigan jails and why they're there and whether we need to keep as many people locked up as we have now. Let's start with that, the answers to those questions. Who is in Michigan jails?
This is on? Yeah, I guess it is. Thank you all for inviting us. It's wonderful to be able to talk about the work the task force was engaged in for the last 9 months. It was a wonderful process, and we learned a lot. Before we started, we didn't know the answer to the question Nolan just asked me, who is in Michigan jails? We did know that the jail populations had tripled over the last 30 years when crime is at a 50-year low. So we knew we wanted to know because we wanted to make sure that that growth in jail population was actually producing the results that the criminal justice system wants, making our communities safer. And so that was the first part of the project. In fact, that took a number of months gathering the data about who is in our jails. What we learned is about 50%, I'm going to give you the top lines because there's lots to talk about. We learned that about 50% of the folks in our jails are serving some kind of sentence. Either they've been convicted of some kind of misdemeanor or low-level crime, or they're serving a sentence for violating probation or parole, and we can talk more about that later. And the other half, the other 50%, have not been convicted of any crime. They are awaiting process, awaiting trial. So they are waiting to get to trial. So now we know a little bit more about who's there, but we also learned a little bit more about what offenses were driving our jail populations. And there are sort of two different sets of populations. There was a large group, a large number of people doing very short stays in jail, a day, 2 days, 3 days a week. But it's a large enough number that it's impacting our communities a great deal. And those were for minor offenses, and I'll let the Lieutenant Governor talk a little bit more about that. And then there was a much smaller number that were serving much longer periods in jail. And so those two different jail populations, we thought needed different policy recommendations.
Yeah, Lieutenant Governor, why don't you talk about some of the things, some of the offenses and behaviors that can land you in jail in Michigan?
So one of the most, I think, egregious findings that was borne out is the sheer percentage of people who are in jail because they have a suspended driver's license. And the irony of the fact that they're like half of the people who are in jail are there because they have a suspended driver's license is because this is an infraction. Typically, your driver's license suspended, you get a fine, all right? And let's say you are not able to pay that fine, or like sort of not paying that fine, that then becomes a crime that you then get picked up for next time you get stopped with your suspended driver's license and not paying your fine, and then you get taken to jail. Well, if you are in jail, it is like by definition impossible for you to then afford to pay the fine that locks you up. So this kind of cycle just continues to eat itself. And this is one of the biggest plagues on communities, and it's one of the things that has really driven the growth of our jail population. And so this is one of the things, actually it's the first recommendation, frankly, that the task force made, is to significantly alter the way that we treat suspended driver's licenses. Because I mean, we suspend people's driver's licenses for things that have nothing to do with how they drive. It's kind of like how we try to deal with car insurance. Like you can't set your car insurance rate based on things that don't have anything to do with how you drive. Well, with driver's license suspension, you know, if you are unable to pay a fine, that does not make you a bad driver or a dangerous driver. Reckless driving is one thing, not being able to afford to stay out of jail is another. And so we recommend sort of shifting the way that we're thinking about these types of offenses. And we have other recommendations that are related to changing certain misdemeanors into civil infractions so that you are not taken to criminal jail, or reclassifying certain felonies as misdemeanors, giving law enforcement officers the discretion to cite for offenses rather than arrest people. These are things that will directly impact the community because, you know, these mechanisms have not led to public safety.
So let's stay with the suspended driver's license for a minute, which, as you both know, it's half the people in jail at any given time are there because their license are suspended. One of the things that can get your license suspended is not paying your child support. As you mentioned, has nothing to do with safe driving. There's a number of other things have nothing to do with safe driving, but we've layered those license suspensions on as penalties for a variety of offenses over the year. The impact of putting someone in jail for a license suspension, taking them away from their families, taking them out of the workplace, I mean, there's a real human impact of that, as well as an economic impact on our communities.
And it's actually, when hearing from the police officers on the task force was really telling on this, because sometimes, and there are some people who have their driver's licenses suspended because they could not afford to pay court fines or fees from some other case. And then suspending your license is an automatic repercussion of that. There are some people that just forgot to pay a ticket. You know, you get a ticket, it gets lost under your front seat of your truck, you forgot you even got it, you don't pay it, your license is then automatically suspended, you get pulled over.
You might not even know it, right?
I bet you might not. I bet it could happen. You didn't even know it. Police officer now pulls you over, you're driving a car full of kids to school. You're now committing a misdemeanor for which you must go to jail. The police officers on the task force said, you wouldn't believe how many times I've pulled over a mom on her way to drop kids off at daycare, didn't know her license was suspended, and now I have to take her to jail.
Officer has no choice under Michigan law.
That's right. So in addition to decoupling suspending people's driver's licenses from offenses that have nothing to do with driving safety, if you're charged with reckless driving or driving under the influence, you probably need your driver's license suspended. But if you just didn't pay your child support yet, suspending your driver's license is probably not going to make it more likely that you get that paid more quickly, right? Because now you can't get to work. And, you know, we live in Michigan. You have to drive to work, right? I mean, you guys are working on transit.
I'm trying to work on that. That's
okay,
another meeting.
That's a different lunch talk. But you got to drive to work.
Yeah. So
can I talk about this impact, though, Nolan? Because it is really important. So when we talk about the disruption that wreaks havoc on lives when people have even the shortest jail stays, we also need to talk about the fact that the system is not working in terms of encouraging people to not commit offenses in the future. Like the research shows that even spending one night in jail makes it much more likely that you will spend future nights in jail. So that basically being in jail begets more jail time. This is one of the reasons why it is so important that we be more thoughtful about who is in jail and why, and that we can be smarter about finding ways to protect public safety that do not include warehousing people. this has a tremendous economic impact because people in jail are not contributing to our economy. They are not consuming. They are not producing. They are not coming up with ideas and then bringing those ideas into the world. This is something that we have to stop doing so that we can actually unlock everyone's full potential. And it's something that hasn't been happening enough in communities across Michigan.
And Garlin, we think about those, the people who are in jail as, other people, not touching our lives. But you asked a question in the student session, how many of you all know someone who's either in jail or been in jail? Every hand went up. I mean, you asked the same question here.
Yeah, let's do that. So how many of you either know have been in jail yourself, I guess you might not want to raise your hand, but know somebody who's been in jail or is connected to someone who has been in jail at some point?
Yeah, so this isn't a problem that's outside your world. This is in your world. And Justice McCormack, I want to ask you about the other piece of this, because there are a lot of people in jail who need to be in jail. Not everybody needs to be in jail, but there's some. Jail's the first stop. If you get arrested for murder or any other felony, you go to jail first. The other piece of this problem is the inefficiency of moving people through the criminal justice system. You all went up to the Genesee County Jail on your advice. I went up there a few weeks ago and interviewed people who had been in jail 4 to 5 years, waiting for trial, waiting for their case to be adjudicated. And just this past week, one of those people we interviewed, Larry Clemens, over 4 years in prison, almost 5 years in prison.
Jail, not prison.
Jail. On a murder trial without getting, or on a murder charge without getting a trial. He got his trial finally and was acquitted. Now he's been almost 5 years behind bars for a crime he wasn't guilty of. How do you give him justice?
I don't have a lot to do for Larry, but you raise another important part of this, of our work, which we did focus on the period where people are awaiting trial. And you're correct, Nolan, some people need to be in jail for public safety to be protected. So they're probably not the guy who forgot to pay his fine and had his license suspended and didn't even know it. There's a category of people who we do not only do we not need them in jail to protect public safety, it's making us less safe to put them in jail. The Lieutenant Governor is correct about the research about those folks, right? Then there's another group of people that the recommendations will do retain the discretion for judges to make sure that people who do pose a threat to public safety can be held in jail. That's got to be part of.
But they shouldn't be there for 4 years.
There is a right to a speedy trial in Michigan, and 4 years doesn't sound very speedy, if that's your point.
So what does constitute a speedy trial? I mean, what's reasonable?
So the United States Supreme Court says that if it's taken more than 18 months, it's presumptively not speedy. Then there's a bunch of things that lawyers and judges argue about whether it's permissible anyway. And the task force actually made a recommendation about making sure that Michigan's speedy trial law has some teeth, that 18 months actually means something. And that is one of the recommendations. And one of the things we did learn about in the community and in a visit to the Genesee County Jail, there were people in that jail had been there 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. They told us they had one person who had been there 7 years awaiting trial. That's not okay.
And these people, like we saw with Mr. Clemens last week, they may be innocent, and yet they're paying for a crime they didn't commit, paying a pretty high price. We were in that jail. It's not a place you want to spend your life. And the folks who are able then to go turn my phone off,
want
but
me to
not
get
my
that?
alarm.
Just I'll get it.
It's my alarm. I'm missing a meeting.
This is a bad phone.
Anyway, but those folks who are paying this price, waiting in jail, I mean, even the ones who are guilty, both society and the defendants would be better off in prison, right? I mean, where they could get some corrective services.
That's a really important part of why this matters, why these reforms matters. Jail is not a place for people who need to serve years, right? People who have been convicted of a serious crime and are going to have to serve a sentence, a substantial sentence. should be serving it in prison, where we have the possibility of putting them in a place where when they are released, they will not come back to the criminal justice system. Jail can't do that. Jail is a place where the county sheriff has to keep people safe and hopefully get them through so that they can either get to prison or get released.
But there are very few of the kind of services
No.
that are designed to rehabilitate, to correct, to prepare them for life when they eventually, and they will, are released.
Well, let's take this a step further about what our jails are not designed or intended to do. So yes, that type of service delivery that you're describing does not take place in jail, and like it shouldn't. That's not what that's built for. But there are some other things that are forced to take place in jails that are just not being done in the right way. Over the time that we had this task force through our public meetings, we did 6 meetings all over the state. We had 13 plus hours of public testimony. And the research showed or backed up the anecdotal evidence we got from that testimony. And it was that, upwards of 3/4 of the people who are in county jail have had some sort of serious mental health episode. Now, that's important because what we have effectively done through state disinvestment in behavioral health infrastructure is forced our law enforcement officials, our county sheriffs and jail administrators to be the deliverers or to be on the front line of mental and behavioral health service delivery in the state of Michigan. That is not what these people were trained to do. That's not what they were educated to do. That's not what they want to do. It's not what they're able to do effectively. And that puts them in danger. That puts other people who are currently in jail in danger. That puts the people in danger themselves because they're not getting the services and the supports that we need. That they need. So one of the reasons, that's another reason why one of the recommendations is, again, calling on the state to recommit to invest in that infrastructure that was decimated over the last 30 years. People are clamoring for these support for this mental health, behavioral health, substance abuse support. There are programs that exist that are designed to help these people get on their feet. Jail is not one of those systems, but we've tried so hard to make the jail be the answer for things that we don't want to invest in, to make the jail be the place where we put people that we don't want to invest in. And that's something that we need to change. And these recommendations put us on that path again, because I believe, our task force members believe, and I think communities across the state believe that these are people who do have value. These are people that can contribute if we give them a chance, if we give them the support. They are the people who can work with you, work alongside you in all the things that you're doing.
There's no one more, oh good. Yeah, go. There's no one more eloquent on this point than the sheriffs, the deputy sheriffs, and the police officers, I have to say. Those folks on our task force were so compelling. I heard a sheriff's deputy say, you wouldn't pick up somebody with a broken leg and drop him off at the jail and say, he's your problem now. But regularly, people are picked up with serious mental health crises and dropped off at the jail. And when we say to the sheriff, it's your problem now, he's your problem now. The sheriff's deputies, it's not fair to them, it's not fair to the police officers, and we can do better.
So you recommend a detect and diversion approach to this, empowering police officers to make decisions in the field of whether to take someone to a jail or to a mental health facility, and then offer them treatment in whatever place they go to. But Lieutenant Governor, as you mentioned, we've dismantled that mental health network. Part of this jail reform initiative has to be rebuilding the mental health system and creating places within communities, every community in the state, where people can be taken to.
That is absolutely true. And our administration has been clear that we believe and need and are committed to putting the state back on a path to rebuilding that infrastructure that, as I said earlier, has been decimated over the last generation. And we've seen the result. We have communities that don't feel less safer. We have victims that do not feel less supported. And we have people who are not getting what they need and instead are being warehoused in jails that are not built to support them. So one of the reasons why that is a part of this task force's recommendations is because it is a statement coming from this perspective that says that this is an investment that is worth making for the state of Michigan. So when we're having these budgetary conversations, and that by far is the recommendation that has the most significant budgetary impact, but we have to think about our budgets as a statement of our values. And one of the things that I am, cautiously optimistic about is that we've seen the area of criminal justice reform more broadly has been the #1 area of bipartisan consensus in Michigan since we took office. We signed bipartisan legislation on reforming civil asset forfeiture, bipartisan legislation on raising the age so that 17-year-olds will not essentially automatically be treated as adults, bipartisan legislation about paroling the medically frail. I signed a bill and a law about enabling people who have had felonies on their records to get a professional license to do things like sell insurance. We've changed regulatory frameworks that enable people who have certain types of criminal records to be able to pursue professional licenses because guess what? They have value and can contribute as entrepreneurs or as employees in businesses like yours. This has been an area of bipartisan consensus, and we need to build upon that. And part of that means, yes, putting the state's money where our values need to be, and that's on investing in this kind of infrastructure.
Can we save money from the folks who are not locking up and use that money for mental health services? Is it a...
I think that's part of it, yes. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that the money, I think it's like $2+ billion that's spent on county jail systems has not been money that is fully well spent. But I think in order to build the infrastructure in the way that we actually need it, there will need to be additional investment.
But it sort of, the economic question always depends on how wide your lens is, right? I mean, so, and by the way, throwing more and more money at the jail system has not made that system produce better results. It has not made our communities safer. And what other government program do conservatives say, oh, it's not really working, let's throw more money at it? That's not usually how we do business, right? So this is an issue about which values drive these decisions, and now evidence drives these decisions. But you're right, when you think about the money we're spending, if you're not spending it in jailing people who don't need to be there and in fact are not contributing when they are there, you're probably gonna free up money for things that might actually make our communities safer, might make them healthier, might make our businesses more able to have employees who can come to work.
I mean, jobs are jail prevention programs.
Best way out of crime is a job.
Yeah, jobs are jail prevention programs. Economic opportunity, educational opportunity, these are jail prevention programs. And so, you know, the spirit of this recommendation are about fixing the system that's broken. But as the Chief Justice said, if we zoom out, if we think about this from a place of prevention and empowering people to be able to not only live in different circumstances but make different choices, then we have a chance to protect and promote public safety in a much broader sense.
And to that point, I mean, Justice McCormack, you talked about using that time folks are in jail to give them the skills that they need to stay out of jail the next time or avoid coming back.
And that's what smart policy would do, right? So, and right now, the Department of Corrections is actually doing tremendous work training people who are people who are serving sentences or getting to the end of their sentences, training them in the trades that our businesses desperately need workers, and then getting them jobs before they get released. That's smart, right? The recidivism rates on the folks going through Director Washington's vocational village program are extremely low because they're working, they can support themselves. I don't see why we don't want to do that at the front end of the system as well. There's a brand new judge in Livingston County who told me, he's a district court judge, he said, he has all these connections to the building trades. He says, my folks who are on probation in district court or awaiting trial but under supervision, I'm gonna put as one of their conditions, have them complete a building trades licensing program. Why not? Why wouldn't we use that time when people are under our supervision one way or another to give them the skills and the tools to succeed? So, who do we want to be?
So talk about the pushback. I mean, we've seen in some other states that have done this, you've had pushback from prosecutors, from police saying, you're making our communities less safe by letting folks out of jail who otherwise would have been in jail. I mean, what do you say about the public safety aspect of this?
Well, part of the process, and let me just take a step back and talk about the task force and how it was structured. So we had legislators from both chambers and both parties. We had the Prosecuting Attorneys Association of Michigan represented on the task force. We had county sheriffs and deputy county sheriffs. We had judges, we had lawyers, we had indigent defense. We had people who had been formerly incarcerated. We had people who were survivors of crime, people who were victims' rights advocates. So the task force was structured in a way that had all these stakeholders at the table so that while we were deliberating what the recommendations would be, we would have that robust conversation. I had the pleasure of being in the subgroup that looked at pretrial experiences, and in our subgroup, we had one of our judges, we had our prosecutor and a county sheriff all talking about how we can make this system work better. And so, you know, the idea is we both use the research, use the evidence, use the anecdotal things that we've heard, used the expertise collectively that was brought to the table to think about public safety in a broader sense. So this pushback about, well, what's happened in other places, you know, I mean, sure, that's going to happen. Like, we couldn't let the fact that some person in Michigan will disagree with a set of recommendations be a blockage to us making recommendations that we reached consensus upon. But I think this is about, again, the research shows that a person spending a night in jail is more likely to spend another night in jail in the future.
So I want to stop here because you've talked about research, and Justice, you've talked about research. We need to note that there was extensive amount of statistical data gathered and analyzed thanks to the Pew Charitable Trust, which funded this. And for the first time, we will go into policy making now armed with data, and it's the data guy, Garlin. I mean, that's got to be very impressive and important to you.
So the partnership that we have with the Pew Charitable Trust actually was extraordinary. So a bipartisan group of leaders, Governor Gretchen Whitmer, the Speaker of the House, the Senate Majority Leader, the Michigan Association of Counties, the Michigan Association of County Sheriffs, all came together to request that Pew step in as a partner for this effort on a bipartisan basis. And they did so. We had, I believe, 9 full-time policy, research, and data analysts. The reason we needed all of that firepower is because there are 83 counties in Michigan. There are 81 county jail systems, and there are 81 county jail data and information systems, none of which are compatible. That is why we did not know the answers to the questions that Nolan posed in the beginning. So we needed this firepower so we could actually get a clear sense of the problem, so then we could prescribe solutions that actually respond to reality. That's what this needs to be about.
So we've got the report. We had the test. We got the report. We've seen reports on government reform come and go in Michigan over the years without much being done. Justice McCormack, how does this become policy?
So we delivered the report to the legislative leadership last week, and both the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader said that it is their #1 priority this legislative session. They already have staff working on drafting legislation to put the recommendations into law. Our partners at Pew will remain on the project for the next 9 months. They'll be in Michigan continuing to meet with people, and the task force remains in place for the next 9 months to actually continue to meet with people. And I want to, part of why we're optimistic is because of your last question. Unlike the processes in many other states, this one really was different because of the group of people around the table at the front end, figuring out what the different perspectives are, and the collection of the data. We took our time to figure out who's in jail, then did the research, then brought this diverse group of people to consensus on a set of recommendations that will make Michigan's communities safer and better reflect our values based on evidence. So it's unlike what's happened in most other states, and I think there's reason to be pretty optimistic.
The task force is now transitioned from a body that was making recommendations to a body that will now advocate for those recommendations to be reflected in law. And that advocacy role is not a role that needs to be limited to the members of this task force. So people in this room and who are of influence in Michigan have a tremendous amount of influence in how policy gets conceived, how policy gets constructed, and how policy becomes law. So one of the reasons why it was important for us to be here today, not only describe the process, describe the nature of the recommendations made, is to ask that you participate in the process to make sure that these things are reflected in public policy, because I believe that it will benefit all of our communities, it'll benefit all of our businesses to have more people able to fully participate in our future.
Well, as we said in the beginning, I mean, whether it's jail reform, prison reform, evidence reform, all under the umbrella of getting justice right. And we know in this state the consequences of not getting justice right. We have an example of that today. We have a man with us, Daryl Seggers, if you'd stand up, spent 34 years in Michigan prisons for a crime he didn't commit, and is now free and working to help others who are wrongly incarcerated. So. Justice McCormack, Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist, we appreciate your work and thank you for being with us today. Rod, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Nolan, for a very lively session. And of course, you, our audience, have also provided us a number of questions as well. Let me ask let's start with the survey and review of other states, as well as even European nations. Has the task force focused on their view of reform versus punishment, for example? Any lessons learned from either states or European nations that may be useful here?
I mean, we were, again, really lucky to have such a great partner in the Pew Charitable Trust, because we first figured out everything we could about who's in Michigan's jails, and then we had lots of presentations on what the research shows, and a lot of that research was based on what other states have done. And when we were in our subgroups working on policy recommendations, our Pew partners brought us every example of what every other system had tried, and the data about how it worked. So again, it's just another real benefit we had from having such a tremendous partner in the Pew Charitable Trust. We were able to look at all of those other examples, and some of the good ones made their way into our recommendations. We're happy to steal from people who already figured it out. Don't need to reinvent the wheel.
And so on a personal note, so the first international trip that I took as Lieutenant Governor was to Dusseldorf, Germany. It's a state that actually is very similar to Michigan in a lot of ways. And on that trip, I visited a correctional facility in Dusseldorf. It's actually a youth correctional facility. But it was the most amazing thing that I learned there is the person who was the director, the Minister of Corrections for the entire nation of Germany came to meet with me while I was at this facility. And they talked about that their Ministry of Corrections has one purpose, and that purpose is care. I thought that was a fascinating framing. It was not punishment, it was not correction, it wasn't even rehabilitation, it was care. And that mindset shift, thinking about what is the purpose of this body, what is the purpose of these facilities, I thought that was really instructive. And so that certainly was in my mind. I took that trip in November. We started our deliberations in earnest in the latter part of November and December, and so that certainly informed my approach to this work.
So what about reforms at the juvenile justice level? Did the task force make any recommendations in that regard?
So juvenile justice is another area that is ripe for reform in Michigan. I know the Lieutenant Governor has already been doing some thinking about it, and I believe the Governor will soon make some appointments to the Commission on Juvenile Justice. And my colleague, Justice Clemens, is playing a real leadership role on a lot of the reforms that Michigan can look to in the juvenile justice area. Our task force was focused on county jails, which don't house juveniles, but I think there's, obviously the systems are connected, and I believe there's an appetite in Michigan to look seriously at lots of ways we can do juvenile justice better than we're currently doing it.
When did that change? Because I spent a night in the Garden City jail when I was in high school. And,
that was like a long time ago.
I'm glad
you
they fixed
probably
that.
needed to be in jail.
So what did you learn from that experience, Nolan?
Not much, apparently, because look at my career path.
So a question from our students. Instead of issuing tickets, could officers give out community service slips to help limit the number of tickets given?
You mean instead of traffic tickets? Well, yeah, add it to the list of things for the legislature to think about. We did recommend that a number of traffic misdemeanors be downgraded to civil infractions, and if something is a civil infraction instead of a misdemeanor, you're not at risk of going to jail for it. And we can think all kinds of new ways about what kind of accountability should accompany it. So the answer is sort of yes, in a roundabout way.
I mean, one of the things that we tried to look at is there are things that police officers have to arrest you and take you to jail for by law. And so there is a kind of a category of the recommendations that says we need to change that standard for it to not be so rigid, for there to be some discretion for whether it's the police officers, whether it is the judges, but like to not have that be so strict, because we have to recognize that like context matters, situations matter, and therefore the way that we respond to the offenses that may have been created, we should have some flexibility there too.
So what would be the fiscal costs of implementing some of the reforms and recommendations made by the task force? I know we talked about mental health, but there's some others as well. Any deep dive into the cost aspects of this?
So we did not, notably, we did not put dollar amounts, we did not affix dollar amounts to the 18 recommendations that we made. And the reason for that is, frankly, we wanted that to be part of the legislative deliberation. There are a lot of factors that go into the amount of money that's available, let alone the amount of money that needs to be invested. And I think that is an important marker of the fact that this process is not over. Like, us making the set of recommendations is not the end of this criminal justice reform story, this county jail reform story in Michigan. There are still important roles to be played by important people. There are still important decisions to be made, which up to and including the amount of money it will require to have the spirit and the letter of these recommendations reflected. So we did not do a deep dive specifically into that, but that is part of the ongoing advocacy work, and that certainly will be an important part of the conversation when this comes to hearings in the House and the Senate.
And let's remember that what we have now is already expensive. It's not like, what we have now is we're getting it on the cheap. We're not. We're spending a whole lot of money for something that doesn't reflect our values and doesn't reflect the evidence.
So if we continue along the cost issue, is there any low-hanging fruit that you would say are priorities simply because the cost is not that great? Something that we could probably implement right away?
This is like having 18 kids and having to pick a favorite. But I love all my children dearly. So, in all seriousness though, what we found is that there are so many intertwined, broken pieces in this system that we really believe that the true leverage for significant reform rests in having these be reflected and reformed together. So while there are things that different people with different priorities, different interest groups may want to advocate for more vociferously than others, I think as a task force, we're committed to ensuring that as much of the whole is reflected in law as possible. There are things that are more specific and may address immediate harms in very direct ways, but we think that those alone will not represent significant enough reform to really move the needle for communities. So I'm gonna say that I love all of my sons and daughters.
Yeah, we're not trying to make Michigan, almost as good as Texas. We want Michigan to be a national leader in jail and pretrial reform. So we're not gonna pick one, we want them all.
That's fair. That's fair. So let me ask one other before we go to our lightning round here. We touched upon the activities in prisons that provide skill training for the inmates. Is there any incentive for employers to hire those inmates once they leave prison or incarceration of any type?
Any incentive? The incentive is that they will really appreciate having a job and show up. I mean, this is actually true. All of the surveys that have been done from companies that have made significant commitments to hiring returning citizens is that their reviews are better, their performance is higher, their enthusiasm is through the roof. So I think that incentive is in having a high quality, highly skilled, and valuable member of your team and your workforce. Companies across the state and frankly across the country have stepped up and made this choice. And we certainly at the state level want to encourage them to continue to do that because we believe this is an issue of fairness. It doesn't make sense for me to hear from companies every single day, oh, we need more people. We need more talented people. We need more trained people with certifications. For them to have a mechanism to train a whole bunch of talented people who have value, but then say that, well, we don't want to hire those people. That is just fundamentally, and that is inconsistent. Those are inconsistent statements. And so the incentive is that you have a potential set of people who are ready and willing to do great work.
Okay, so just so our audience gets to know you a little bit better, a few lightning round questions. Could you give us something that's on your bucket list?
Do we go one and the other?
Sure, let's start with you, Chief Justice.
I hate saying these things out loud because then somebody might hold you to it. I want to swim the Straits of Mackinac. I want to swim from Mackinac City to Mackinac Island.
Can you top that, Lieutenant Governor?
I want to learn to swim. How about that?
So we'll start with the Lieutenant Governor this time. Give us the last book that you read.
As a Man Thinketh by James Allen.
Okay. Chief Justice?
Until We Reckon by Danielle Sered.
All right. How about one of your favorite movies?
Spinal Tap. This goes to 11.
Oh, gosh. Godfather 2. It's the best movie of all time.
All right. I agree with you on that, Lieutenant Governor. Describe Detroit in one word.
Hopeful.
Ready.
Nolan, you have a thought on that one? Detroit in one word.
Better.
Better. It's good? It's good. All right, let's end with the advice to your 25-year-old self. Lieutenant Governor?
Your plans are terrible. Your plans are terrible, so take full advantage of the situations and the contexts that are in front of you, because you have no idea what you're going to be doing 12 years later.
Chief Justice, please.
Relax, it's going to be fine. Stop worrying.
Nolan, I'm afraid to ask you that question, but I think I will.
Invest in Rogaine.
Thank you very much. Steve, close us out, please.
Hey, one quick announcement before we adjourn. If you like today's program and want to experience it again, there are 3 options. Tomorrow, you can download the audio podcast where you downloaded on your smartphone. You can watch the program on Detroit Economic Club or Detroit Public TV's website. Tomorrow, if you're an Xfinity customer, you can find it on demand in the Get Local section. Lieutenant Governor and Chief Justice, thank you for your service to our state and for your thought leadership today at the DEC. Nolan and Rod, thank you for being an important part of today's program and for your time and talents. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming today on time, every time. This meeting of the Detroit Economic Club is now adjourned. Thank you.